you. Okay, again, just a reminder, you can see it on the board now. Chapter 4 test is Friday. We will finish the notes on Wednesday. You will write that day, since you're gone Thursday, Friday. Thursday, we'll do some review. I have some bookets for the next couple of chapters. Friday, you'll write your test. You go on spring break, no homework, no nothing. We're going to continue where we left off. I gotta find my extra notes that I printed off the other
We
day.
have to do the project.
So,
Yeah.
can anyone remind me, what is chapter 4 about? What is the main issue we are discussing? Chapter
Collective
4.
rights.
Collective rights is correct. Okay. We are looking at the collective rights, particularly of indigenous people. Okay.
I have the paper.
I swear I gave you one yesterday, did I not?
I wasn't.
You weren't here yesterday. Okay, there's one on the shelf right above the mirror. Okay, so Harold Cardinal, along with other members of the IAA, the Indian Association of Alberta, wrote up the red paper in response to the white paper. So what this slide is going on about is, I believe this was, so Pierre Trudeau was essentially around the time of the patriation of the Constitution, or sorry, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, around the patriation of that, just right there. Yeah. He was asking the question of, should indigenous people be treated separately, differently? Also, can you kids see the board, or do you need it closed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Better?
Yeah.
So they're asking the question of, this idea, he believed, so Pierre Trudeau, this is Justin Trudeau's father for the record, he believed Aboriginal people needed to be equal with other Canadians. He viewed laws that set them apart as obstacles to their equality. So they're asking the question, should Indigenous Aboriginal peoples have their own separate collective rights in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? Should they be viewed as separate entities? And the answer to that question is not obvious. It's like, are you a Canadian citizen, or are you, the separate entity, separate group within Canada? And if you are a separate group within Canada, well, how is that supposed to function? Think about it. How many teachers are in this classroom?
One.
One. Well, what would a classroom look like? I don't know who said two, but you had your mind. What would it look like if you had two teachers in the classroom? Split. So maybe one teacher teaches one side, one teacher teaches the other side. Sure, that's a possibility. What would it look like if you had three teachers in the classroom? How would the classroom function? Do you think three teachers all have the same set of rules, expectations, same personality?
No.
You think some teachers would be less likely to move students around when they do irritating things, and other teachers more likely? Right? And so, very similar question here. If you are a separate group of people in Canada and you want your own rights and you want to be governed in your own way, how is that supposed to look? So at the level of a country, well, if you're an Indigenous person and you ask for a separate method of governance and legal system, what happens to an Indigenous person when they, let's say, commit a crime? Let's say they murder someone. Should they have their own form of justice? Should they have their own judge system and their own system of consequences and punishment? Come on, man, who put a Ritz on the floor? It's on my shoe now. Okay. So the white paper set out to remove all legal documents that had existed between the Canadian government and Indigenous peoples. Its end desire was to assimilate First Nations, Métis, Indigenous peoples as an equal group amongst citizens of Canada. So Pierre Trudeau is trying to say, no. In Canada, moving forward, there are only Canadians. You may have had this history of Indigenous history, maybe European, Pakistani, wherever you're from for your own family, but moving forward, 1982 onwards, we're all Canadians. We all have the same access to rights and freedoms. The red paper was an effort to counteract that. It set out to maintain those same extra privileges, but to make amendments and reforms to the existing Indian policies. Okay, so this gentleman here, Harold Cardinal, is with other people, is attempting to maintain the status and identity of Indigenous peoples. Oh, there's really not much on this slide, hey? Anyways, so in regards to the change, obviously, first thing you should note is that the Indian Act was written in 1876. Does anyone here know anyone who was alive in 1876? Like still alive?
Wait, my mom was born.
No, come on, 1876. That's over 150 years ago. Right?
Oh, 18. Oh,
1876, not 1976. 1876, right? So the reason why I mentioned that is because it's a very old document and people saw and viewed the world. Okay, one of you two, between the person who threw it and the person who got it thrown at, one of you two can move. So he's pointed at you, so you with the gray hat, I can't say names on the video, can move right there. Okay. And someone from this group might get moved as well soon.
I just stretched.
Because you're allowed. Okay? So Bill C-7, the First Nations Governance Act, set out to give band councils more power in terms of lawmaking, leadership selection. The bill failed and was followed by Bill S-216, where the desired outcome was to promote the recognition and implementation of the right to self-government for the First Nations in Canada. One of the things I missed in the previous slides from my notes, because I didn't realize I had extra notes from last year, was what the Indian Act did is it essentially changed the way Indigenous tribes and groups govern themselves. So rather than have their traditional way of picking a leader, the Indigenous groups were told to vote on a band leader, or a chief, tribal leader, whatever you want to call it. And that person was in charge of the relationship between that group of Indigenous people and the government. So in that Bill C6, Bill S-216, the Indigenous communities are attempting to regain their autonomy. Okay, do we understand what this word autonomy means? Autonomous. Okay, it means, so if you are autonomous, it means you make your own decisions, which many of you likely do not, right? Because you're still children. Maybe you make some decisions, like today you chose where to sit in the classroom, although humans sometimes act like computer programs and you all choose to sit in the same spots, more or less. It's not clear to me that you even made a choice. But you made a choice at one point. Okay. And if I decided to scramble up all the desks and make a new seating arrangement, you'd make a new choice tomorrow. Maybe there will be a new seating structure soon. Okay. And again, coming back to that point from the previous slide that we discussed, of course, my document is on something else now. Okay. Coming back to that point that we discussed. Here's your notes. You forgot them yesterday.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. It's not clear or obvious how two separate governments should function under one nation state, one country. Okay. And again, crime is the biggest complication in that. How do you deal with criminal behavior? Okay, so here's a little cartoon here. How many of you even know what Idle No More is? No? Okay, then we'll just skip over this. Okay, moving on. Now we have collective rights for language groups. There's Anglophones and there's Francophones in Canada who get collective rights from the Charter. And the reason for that is because there is a belief in the shared sense of history for the two groups. So here's a very old map of language data. Although I would say it hasn't changed very much. We're seeing majority red, which is for English speakers. Blue is seen primarily in Quebec. Green is in Nunavut for, what is the language? Inuktitut. I'm sure I'm butchering that word. So these two groups played an important role in creating Canada's government. Some would argue that they stole everything from Indigenous peoples and didn't include them. There's quite a bit of legitimacy to that statement as well. Regardless, history is history. You can't go back and change it. And so the two of the three foundational groups that were around during Confederation, English and French, amongst Indigenous peoples, obviously they're going to do something to protect those two languages in this country. Now imagine if we added in a third official language. Let's say something like Spanish, although that relates more to America than it does to us. It would bring up a lot of different challenges. So some of the rights that are given is official bilingualism. Bi because there's two, not tri. We don't have a third official language. So in Canada and many places outside of Quebec, you really don't see French language signs or shop titles or anything. Right? How many of you have actually really seen much French displayed publicly?
Really, the only place I saw it was at the airport.
Okay, at the airport, right? And that makes sense. Anywhere else? Anyone? Anyone here by any chance live in Beaumont? Some of you live in Beaumont. Okay, so Beaumont is a French community in where? Sometimes packaging as well, right? Definitely. If you look at the nutritional data, if you look at the ingredients of the food, which you absolutely should to educate yourself on what's in your food, you'll notice that there is both English and French labels. Okay. But practically speaking, we really don't see French in our day-to-day life. Now, if you go to Quebec, I don't know has anyone here been to Quebec? Okay, one other person. So if you go to Quebec, what did you see while you were there? Did you see any English?
Not much.
If at all, right?
Yeah.
And those rights are protected by the Charter in sections 16 to 20. And they affirm the right for French people, English people to receive services in that language. So let's say if you went to Canada Place and you spoke French. For those of you who don't know, Canada Place is mainly the citizenship office. They do a bunch of stuff related to citizenship. It's in Edmonton. So if you went there and you started speaking French, it's very likely, it should be very likely, that the person is capable of speaking French with you. You can get that service. Additionally, hospital services, legal services, all of these things are some of your collective rights. There's also minority language education rights. So Section 23 of the Charter says that a French-speaking or English-speaking minority population of sufficient size in any province has the right to publicly funded schools that serve their language community. It's not obvious or clear to me what they mean by sufficient size. Now let's say in Leduc, your family of, let's say there's 6 of you, are the only ones who speak French. Is that sufficient size to have publicly funded school? No, right? Now let's say for whatever reason your family had 30 kids all around the same age. Okay, so you can fill up a whole classroom. Is that a sufficient size?
Yeah.
For a school? Maybe not for a bit of funding and programs, potentially, right? But let's say there is enough people to occupy a school of 200 to 700 people. It's quite reasonable that they could make a claim and a case to get educational rights in their language. And again, this minority, this only really applies to French and English speaking populations. Now, schools can provide language training in different languages. So when I was in high school, I went to McNally Composite. They had a Cantonese program. You can get a German program, Spanish. For the record, Cantonese is a language they speak in China. Right. Nowadays, they're really pushing Ukrainian programming because obviously there's a lot of Ukrainian refugees. Although that same sentiment wasn't extended to Arab-speaking refugees, unfortunately. Well, there are a couple Arabic language schools in Edmonton and Alberta. Anyways, you have a history. So 1983, 1 year after the charter entrenches the rights of French-speaking people, soon after you start to see French-speaking people in French minority provinces start to request and ask for the ability to be educated in French. And why is language even important? Like, why do you think we're discussing language? Because it's not obvious, is it? Why do you think we're even discussing language? Say that again? Okay, why is it a right? Why do they care so much about language? Does language really matter? Wait, you got 3 friends sitting with you. Get it off them.
They all missed it too.
Okay, why are we discussing language rights? What is so important about language in education? Communication's a big key part of it, right? What is Canada's history with language and not educating people in their language? We already talked about in this slideshow. Okay, which schools did they really emphasize not being able to speak your own language? Residential schools. So we have a history in this country of denying people their right to be educated in their own language. And again, for all of us, because we all speak more or less speak English. What is this? Blue stick. Because we all speak English and your teachers speak English and your administrators, it's not really a problem for us. And we don't necessarily even have to think about it. But if you went to Quebec, it could be a problem for you, especially if you weren't in Montreal or Ottawa. I've been told that in Quebec City, people are very stingy about, speaking French. So if your family moved there for some reason, it would be very necessary and useful for you to be educated in that language so you can communicate, so that you can connect with people around you. Okay, did you get what you missed on the last slide?
Yeah. The one that says 1997.
Okay, do you need that?
Yeah.
This one?
No.
No.
This slide.
It's in front of it though.
Okay.
What?
Okay.
No, that's not it.
Anyways, Bill 101 is a precursor to some of these collective language rights. And the way the legal system operated in Canada before the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is very different, and quite frankly, I don't know enough about it to teach you about it. But part of the process, previously, was you raise your concern to the government, and the government, through the court system, makes a decision, right? It's based off English common law, which again, we don't need to get into that either. Okay. Bill 101, the Quebec law makes French the language of government and the everyday language of work, education, and business. This is for Quebec. So a fun little story, when Mr. Quadra was living in Quebec, I lived there for about 4 months. I was working in an A&W's, I worked the night shift, and often, because it was just me and my friend who worked there, neither of us spoke French. I don't know why, but I frequently got told to, serve as cashier. I don't speak French. And, people in Quebec have a right to get service in the French language. Now, it only occurred twice where I had two people who were very, very insistent that I speak to them in French. And how do you think that went? Pretty bad, very poorly. Do you think this person got their right order?
Probably not.
They did not. And they were very upset about it. And, people can be very stubborn because this is something that French people feel very strongly about. This one in particular individual, he's very stubborn. He wouldn't even point to the menu. He just kept speaking in French. And I kept telling him, very calmly, I just stood there. I said, I'm sorry, I don't speak any French. Can you point to what you'd like? More angry French noises and me smiling at that point. And my friend is off to the side. He was buying something. My friend who speaks French but refuses to help us communicate because he's too busy laughing at us.
Oh my god.
Why?
That's the best friend ever.
And after
Yeah,
the
that
third
was an
time this
amazing
person
plan.
reiterated his order in French and me saying, sir, I apologize, I don't speak any French. At this point, I can't help it. I look over at my friend, I start laughing too. 'Cause it's just silly. And I said, okay, you know what? Sounds like he's saying it's his A&W, so sounds like he's saying he wants a team burger. Let's just give him a meal. Get him his meal. On the way to go, he yells something in French on the way out, slams the door. I look at my friend, we're laughing, like, what is up with this guy? Like, what's wrong with him? What's his issue? Oh, just speak English, man. It's Canada. Speak English. But we're in Quebec, obviously. Anyways, this guy comes back in 2 seconds later. He's yelling again. And this time, I really don't know what he wants. Like, buddy, you got your food. Get out of my face. Right? Oui, baguette. Yeah. At this point, my friend steps in because, this could be a problem. And he asks him, well, what do you want? The guy says, hey, I ordered sweet potato fries, not regular fries. And then we got him his sweet potato fries and sent him on his sweet, merry French way. I don't even know if he wanted that burger, but I think he might have just decided, well, this guy here's an idiot, doesn't know how to speak French. So I'm not going to deal with this guy.
You were born in Alberta, right?
I was born in Pakistan.
Oh, Pakistan.
Yeah.
That. Oh.
So for many French people, this is 1977. Maybe some of your parents weren't even born back then.
My mom was born in 19.
My mom was born too.
My mom was born in 1876.
I'm gonna tell her you said that. Does anyone know what PFK is?
KFC. It is KFC.
Yeah, it's KFC. The French word for chicken is poulet. That's why there's a B.
What does the F mean?
Poulet French kitchen.
I'll do some research on that and I will tell you.
So some rules here. I don't know why this thing keeps going there. Some rules here. So commercial signs may use only French. When you go to Quebec, all the streets say I don't know exactly how to say it. I think it's a rue. R-U-E. Anyone here French? Okay. So in Quebec, all the streets have R-U-E on them. How do you say that as rue or rue? Oh. Yeah, everybody hear that? Like the way you roll the R. So nice. Right? So they don't call them streets, S-T, they call them rue.
En route.
Yes. And so in France they say KFC. In Quebec, they say PFK. Do you think it's because the French people are really like nose in the sky and like that's not food, so we're not even gonna give it a French? I would be shocked to find French people going to a KFC in France. Like they're very specific about their cuisine.
Well,
So you've been to France then? Okay, cool. Would anyone here ever go to France?
Nope.
well, I would like to visit France.
I'm sure you'd like a big head.
I would love a big head.
Francophones and immigrants in Quebec must attend Francophone schools. It was quite common. Interestingly enough, it was quite common where every now and then one of the guys who's my boss, he grew up in Quebec, he learned French, but for whatever reason over the last few years before I met him, he had kind of forgotten it. And he said the only time he could speak French fluently, despite the fact that he grew up there and learned it, was when he was angry and swearing at people.
Oh God. Oh gosh, I mean.
Which may have happened often. Okay, we will wrap up there.